Welcome to Cooperant Learning. I'm Kyle Steary. We have two guests today, including our first ever returning guest. So, David, we didn't scare you away last time. Very excited that you're back. And this is episode 11. So I think we're kind of a real podcast now. So returning guest and double digits. So, but yeah, David Cox is a full stack data scientist, behavior analyst with nearly 2 decades of experience at the intersection of behavior science, ethics, and AI. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Joining him today, behavior scientist, filmmaker, CEU content creator, digital storyteller. You know him as the producer of documentaries such as This Way of Thinking, the History of Behavior Analysis Part 1, and the Morningside Model, Ryan O'Donnell. Welcome.
Thank you. It's really excited to be here. It's been a while since I've been on a podcast. I'm stoked.
Man, we're really excited to have you guys. We were talking just right before we started rolling here. David, last time you were on, we kind of started getting into some of these topics and then didn't really have time to break into some of the theoretical, conceptual, philosophical kind of underpinnings of the new AI overtake. So I'm really, really excited to dig into this with both of you guys. You both are the creators of Project Chiron. It's an initiative educating behavior analysts all about AI. So I want to talk about that. But first, I really wanted to open up the discussion to just talk about AI in general. I think we could do a lot of stuff, do a lot of damage just talking about what it is that we're dealing with here. I think of Terminator when I think of robots kind of thinking for themselves. If you were born past the 1900s, that's a robot apocalypse movie. It was kind of popular when I was a kid. But now we've got this tool that's kind of becoming this wrapped up, commodified, product that's being sold and used by people on a really wide scale. Behavior analysts are using it. I tend to view it kind of pessimistically, but I'm curious of your guys' interpretation of kind of where we're at with AI and ABA intersecting at this point in time. So what's the good, what's the bad, and what are we kind of dealing with?
Why don't you lead us, Dave?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Happy to jump into it. I think so AI is huge, right? So there's all sorts of use cases there. I think a lot of people I interact with, especially if they're new to AI, when they hear AI, they might think directly about large language models, ChatGPT, Claude, things like that. But if people are only thinking about AI in terms of large language models, it's kind of like thinking about behavior analysis only in terms of autism, right? There's so much more that goes into it. And so kind of same with AI. So kind of looping that back around to your question, I think I'm incredibly optimistic about AI in many different ways. I think I'm also terrified of AI in many different ways, kind of going to, model use case, how it's being rolled out, things like that. I don't know, maybe I'll pause there. I'm curious to get your kind of read, Ryan, and then maybe we can talk about use cases and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like it's probably a daily basis or multiple times a day that I swing between like the optimistic and pessimistic side. It depends on like what I'm scrolling, what I'm reading, what I'm digging into. I try not to have any of that kind of like swinging back and forth come into the stuff that we're producing. And it's been really cool to have a partner on this that's just like an absolute expert, because I can basically throw like, yo, this is like the gut reaction I get here. And then he can kind of like give me an interpretation, which has been very useful. I've always enjoyed when new technology, new tools come onto the market, like playing around with them if I can. And it's usually like a cost sort of thing. Like, what's the barrier of entry? Can I kind of play around this real quick? And with ChatGPT jumping on in late 2022, it was an easy barrier. I mean, just open up a browser and start going. And so played around with that a lot the first day. I was working with a team of people remotely, and we basically just scratched our day and just talked to the robot constantly, back and forth. And it was, for me, just like a really cool, interesting use case of something that felt really novel, that I think in hindsight, like is feeding into, giving you answers that you're kind of looking for. And so anytime something like that is interesting to me, I also like to look at the data and the uptake of that. I mean, it was the fastest, I think, consumer product like to ever hit the market ever. And we'll see if anything beats it.
Yeah.
But those things really catch my eye. So I was like, well, it's going to be big. But like, how is this going to play into our field? It seems to be happening a few different ways. And we can get into some of those, I guess, use cases. It seems to be that there's a lot of people taking it seriously and trying to figure out how is this going to help people, but there's also a lot of opportunities for people to essentially create solutions that are going to be very questionable on the ethics front, very questionable on data privacy fronts and things like this too. And those are things, I guess, that I'm more scared about. Is just social media showed us how easy it is for people to kind of sign off their rights to their data and their privacy. Not that it hadn't happened in other ways before that, but this is just continuing down that road.
I see things, I get probably targeted ads because of those same privacy issues that I've signed away, but just discussing, products that, save time in your summary notes, session notes, automatically fill out a billing form, even to the point of, a tool that helps you write plans. Are these things that we should take with a grain of salt? Are they ready to go? Are they being sold maybe a little bit of jumping the gun? What's your take on that?
Yes, all the above.
Yeah.
I feel like David, you want to like start with one? We can just kind of parse them.
This probably gets into the use cases a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's also just like a lot of topics here.
Oh, for sure. So I mean, I think as with any tool, someone that's selling a product around it to do it well or poorly. And I think this is part of why, I guess maybe I'm speaking out of turn. I think it's why one of the reasons Ryan and I started Chiron, just this like AI literacy, AI education, how to like think about these things. So kind of looking back to the session notes, reports, generators, things like that. To write that well. So if you think about most of the AI systems that are being used there are large language models. So like fundamentally how those work, I take as massive amount of text as possible, large swaths of the internet, and then learn what is the sequence of words, right? After the, ofs follows with like a 98% probability. After the of, whatever. You kind of build up this probability distributions of words in sequences based on, again, like what we see in the internet. So now you can imagine if I'm writing like session notes or say generating some kind of treatment report, if that's my underlying model that I'm sampling and I'm saying like, hey, I have a kid, that's 6 years old with this diagnosis, give me 2 goals on MANS. Well, it's going to take the average of what's on the internet. It's just going to like throw those in there. To me, that's incredibly scary, right? And it's very easy for anybody. Like we've all seen, it's easy to go into ChatGPT. I can just ask that question. As a software development company, I can do, or I could use, say, ChatGPT as like a wrapper. So what that means is there's an API. I can just make a request with that same information, right? So you as my user on my EHR platform, you say, I want these goals for this kid that's 6 years old, maybe under the assumption that me as the software developer, I'm using that kid's data and individualizing it as we have been historically for decades. But I don't have to, right? I can just take that request, send it to the ChatGPT API, get back that response and put it back in the browser or fill out that report. And those are the kind of situations that we saw pop up in the market. And Ryan and I, again, I think it's kind of how this popped up. We started just tagging each other like, hey, are you seeing this? Like, this is crazy. So there's some interesting people out there doing that. Now, relatedly, like in that same scenario, you can imagine I'm a software developer. You have this data, you make that request. I can query that kid's data for the last 6 months, let's say, right? I can create a structured set of information that we would have used anyway, right? If I'm looking back, flipping through all his, I guess when I was last practicing, we had binders, right? I'm dating myself here, but like you're flipping through that, right? Trying to see trends, writing goals. I can aggregate all that same information, anonymize it, and then also use like a walled off model. So it doesn't go back and training data, everything's private, safe, secure. And do the same thing. Give me, 6 goals or whatever for this 5-year-old with this diagnosis. Here's this history of data. Here's what things look like, and return a response. Both of those very different ways of serving, same user input, very similar output on the back end. But how I implement it as a software developer could be, again, really good, really poorly. And there's all sorts of vendors seemingly kind of leaning one way or the other as they sell their products.
So for me, it's like most things in life. I've always come down to this, including behavior analysis, is like, we always say it's the context. For me, it's the nuance. It's the nuance of the implementation of the systems that actually matters as to whether or not you're going to be able to have something that actually serves the goal, serves the function of what you're originally trying to query in the first place, and does it in a way that's actually in the best interest of the client, not creating these privacy concerns and things like this. This is kind of like the I don't know, it is like the more data privacy side of me, not like just freely handing off like the most sensitive data ever to potentially through an API to train these models to be even better at the end of the day, without some sort of reciprocation of that interaction of like you passing off that data. So yeah, it's like the cool part of this is, I think, getting a little bit back to that optimistic and pessimistic, wrong implementations that are sacrificing some of these things, very pessimistic. Optimistic side is, you can create these walled off systems to where you can leverage these things and really help people.
So part of my skepticism, because I'm so uninitiated to a lot of these programs and these systems, I even think of in my behavior analytic writing, you know what I mean? I can't even trust the grammar and spell check to do a good job of helping me write that. It's calling out things that don't quite fit. Have these models, are they able to differentiate like our writing versus other writings in some of these larger kind of when they're just taking all the data available and making it sound behavior analytic, or is it kind of just superficial?
Yeah, superficial. So that there's two other kind of big things if you think about, especially large language models and how they're trained. Again, like as much of the internet as I can grab, old book, like whatever I can get my hands on. That's kind of how these things were trained. Two kind of aspects of that. One, behavior analysis is a very small niche. So even if let's say we assume all of our writings are in there, which I doubt that they all are, but that's going to be such a small portion of the amount of text that went into it. It's not going to overweight the use of these terms and jargon and things like that. So that's kind of one thing that counts against it. The second is that most of the information that we have access to when we make these clinical decisions in particular, we're not posting these on the internet. It's not available. It hasn't been available historically for these models. The same, you see this across healthcare, education, finance, critical areas like that. Like the data that are used are private, not available for these models. So you kind of have this really double whammy where it's, even if our, say, research articles and books and things are in that system, it's such a small portion, it's probably not impacting the weights. And second, the data that we know we need to make these decisions and like write those goals in the proper way, those are also on the internet. Well, until people start, putting it in ChatGPT, I guess, and we'll see the next iteration if it gets better, for better or worse. But yeah, no, I think those are two good call outs.
So if we were to isolate then and just plug in, so Cooperant Learning is a subsidiary of Sparks Behavioral Services where we're doing consulting for severe behavior. If we isolate it, throw in the 4,000 behavior plans we've written in the last 10 years, then that potentially could give at least some suggestions on interventions, that sort of thing, because we would kind of isolate outside the external noise and it would just be our sort of thing.
Yeah. And what you're talking about is this idea, it's called fine tuning. So this has been around also for decades where I have some kind of base model, incredibly expensive to train. I don't want to build the same thing, or I don't have the resources to do it. So I'm going to take those base weights. A lot of these models have many layers to them. The last layer is the specific output for a use case. So I'm going to take this base model, I'm going to cut off the head is what it's called, that last layer, and I'm going to retrain just that last layer on my own information. So I'm fine tuning this big model for my use case. And in that scenario, you get really incredible results, again, focused on your specific use case. And then if you look at a lot of the big healthcare, big education companies, things like that have the money, they're doing this stuff, right? They get that model, they pull it into a private space, they fine tune it on their own data. Now it's fantastic. Now, the one thing I'd throw out there is if I'm starting to play in that game, you'd have to have people that know how to do that. But two, you have a history of clients with particular profiles that you've provided services for. So then you also have to start monitoring this new use case. How close are they to the set of individuals that I've treated historically, right? You get probability confidence intervals, all that kind of fun stuff. So there's kind of going back to like what Ryan and I were saying before, there's a proper way to do this. What makes us nervous is we see people out there that are selling things, unclear exactly how they're doing it, what their model is under the hood. Do they do any fine tuning? What does that look like? So, try to educate people on questions to ask.
Yeah, I think looking into it deeper too, just because we even see behavior analysts that are probably outside their competency area who are using a 10-question questionnaire and then writing full behavior plans on that instead of doing a full functional behavior assessment. And so maybe it's still better than that. We don't know, but someone would have to do a bigger like, meta-analysis of the whole system kind of to figure that out probably.
Yeah.
And
I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was going to move on, but go ahead.
So one thing I was going to throw out there too is I think the other thing that's been really exciting for me with this. So for context, we may have covered this last time, I'm not sure. Before I got into AI, I spent about 8 or 9 years in the kind of choice decision-making realm in healthcare. Like, how do we make the decisions that we do? What struck me and why I got into more of the research aspect is I realized how little we actually know about how we make decisions as behavior analysts, like all these workflows and things we're talking about. So what I think AI has also highlighted is we can talk about the utility of AI for helping write these treatment reports, but we also need to figure out how do we do this already? Like, what is our process? What is our workflow? What data are we using? How are we making these decisions? How do we know that they're right? So it raises a bigger conversation in addition to AI, which I think is exciting for me as a choice researcher.
Yeah, I think it's exciting and scary though, because the number of even just token economies we see thrown in and someone just says, oh, well, that's just what you do. I mean, no, but you have to know theoretically why that fits compared to like other options. You can't just say, token economy fixes behavior, because that's what we get sometimes when we run into other professionals.
Have you ran into them saying ChatGPT told me that was the best solution? Because that
not
that
yet,
stuff's
but I'm
happening too.
surprised.
That's kind of my next
That's the
question
type of stuff that I was seeing presented at conferences that kind of kicked this off. Was just like, whoa, like
Yeah,
we need to step back and ask some questions.
That's kind of what I'm wondering. Is it like some of this stuff presented as like an efficiency? Logistically, this will save you time. I can see that being a big, like, kind of like a money grabber, like corporate interest at this point. Like, hey, we could do this a lot quicker. It takes 10, 20 hours to do a full functional behavior assessment, get all those things in, maybe more. Maybe this robot could do it for us in 1/100th of the time. Terrifying. And also how much weight then, and I guess this goes into Project Chiron a little bit, how much weight of this as we interact with these tools kind of like falls on the behavior analysts to know what it is they're looking at and understand how that conclusion was made. I mean, should we be diving into CEU offerings on this? Like what should we know as behavior analysts using AI to help us along the way?
Yeah, absolutely, CE. So I think the thing that has been very loud and clear, I believe the BACB published something on this, but in healthcare broadly, is very early on, the rhetoric was, at the end of the day, it's your license, your certification that's on the hook, right? You have to sign it, your button. Now, I think that there's good putting some responsibility on us. But the other thing that I saw in a lot of tech companies is they saw that and they go, golden, we're off the hook, right? I can put whatever I want out there because I'm going to make you push a button that says human review this, you're going to have to sign off. And then kind of like you're saying, there's these efficiency gains, right? Lower effort. We know how this works from a behavior analytic perspective. You drop down response effort, increase magnitude of reinforcer, or even keep it the same. Behavior is going to shift in that. And you get people kind of churning stuff out. So because of that, though, we're still kind of in that space. This is where I think I got passionate about AI literacy in the last couple of years is this is being put onto BCBAs. There's nothing really out there to even give them just basic foundational awareness. So I would argue, if you're interacting with AI systems in any capacity, you should probably be doing CEU about something, right? You need to understand what it is you're working with so you can figure out how best to evaluate the output of those systems, because you just never know.
Maybe this gets into a new topic, but I did want to jump in this kind of these like conceptual philosophical underpinnings here. Can we say so ChatGPT, for example, can we say what ChatGPT is doing? Is it valid to analyze that from a behavior analytic perspective? And you touched on it a little bit. Are there contingencies at place that are impacting, changing, punishing, reinforcing AI language model behavior?
Yes, maybe no. I think it kind of comes, and I'm really curious to hear everybody here's opinions on this too, but I think it comes down to like how you define behavior. So if we just look at like how LLM is trained, right? I have a body of text, and I'm saying, hey, here's the string of words or tokens to this point. I want you to predict the next one. And it gives a prediction, it's a probability distribution. But then I get feedback. I say like, nope, you're off by this much. Here was the right answer. Do better next time, right? And so in that same way, that's kind of similar to how we might teach somebody at discrete trial training, like, right? Like tact blue, or like which one's blue? And then we just give them feedback. We kind of go through this system. That kind of builds a base model. There's then this whole system, reinforcement learning with human feedback, right? So now my model's pretty good at generating output tokens, like words of strings based on the probability distributions. And then start putting the answers in front of humans and saying like, play with this system. I want you to interact with it, ask something, rate the output that you get, thumbs up, thumbs down, greater rating scales, you do Likert scales, things like that, factuality, all that fun stuff. And then from that information, I can also kick that back in the same way where I'm using the distance from good to update the weights of the model. I can use that same now feedback from humans to say, like, 1,000 people gave a thumbs up, 100 gave a thumbs down. Therefore, you're 90% of the way there or whatever. Tweak your weights in this kind of capacity. So in that same idea, or in that vein, we have a larger context or environment that the model sits within, where some kind of input is coming in from that context. It's then displaying some kind of output, a response, a behavior, if you will. And then based on the response and the feedback from the user, it's then going to adapt and shift its behavior over time. Maybe it's going to stay the same, reduce some things, increase another. So that's kind of how they work loosely in a nutshell. Whether that counts as like behavior, I don't know. These are really fun, I think, philosophical questions, because one of the questions like, is the digital universe an actual environment? I don't know. There's a lot of stuff online that changes my behavior every day, right? I just see it and interact with it, and it shifts only stuff that I do in this digital world, nowhere else. If you start to think about like complexity and things like that, we attribute behavior to cockroaches, ants, things like that are in many ways much less sophisticated than some of these AI systems. In many ways, ants, cockroaches are more complex than some of these AI systems in this digital universe. So yeah, first react, but I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts, because I think it's, what is behavior?
So to take us farther down the rabbit hole, now that Kyle's opened it up to that.
Hey, we got a half hour, man. Let's do it.
Yeah. What is, what we are seeing right now, would you consider that true AI? Because it sounds like it's just a really complex, multiple exemplar training from basically all that's available online. And I always go back to like the Turing test. Alan Turing said, if it's true AI, it should be able to fool you whether or not is it human or a computer. But it's not clear, because it's not based on the contingencies and the variables that affect human behavior. Does it need to be based on those same variables to really truly be an AI system rather than just machine learning?
So I think it depends on who you talk to. So I'll throw out, I think, where I land on this. And I appreciate that not everybody likes my point of view, and others kind of go in a different direction. But I don't think we know, or maybe I'll restate that. We can define intelligence in many different ways. And so I think I don't know that there's any single thing that we could argue as like, this is intelligent, this is not, like this is the boundary line. And so for me, I think there's some danger in only ascribing. So for example, 5-10 years ago, Netflix recommender system, incredibly sophisticated machine learning. I'm going to recommend movies to you. People saw that and they're like, this is artificial, right? Humans built it, and this is an incredibly intelligent system, by far and above beyond what we had seen before, and it's just recommending movies or whatever. Next year, something better comes out. Well, that's no longer AI now, because we have this new hot thing. Same thing. Then LLMs came out. Well, now this is AI. All the other stuff before doesn't count, and so on. So there's in one vein that sometimes people will ascribe AI label only to the kind of latest, greatest thing. that gets closer and closer to what humans can do, often verbally, because we love VB, we love to stim on our own language. It's really fun. But in doing that, I think, and this is where I fall in the other camp, I think if that's the route we take, we then start to write off, one, a lot of historical examples of artificial intelligence or machine learning, and I'd lump machine learning under the umbrella of AI, that can be just as harmful if they're misused. And there's a great book, Weapons of Math Destruction, that I love talking about here. But even simple things like linear regression, logistic regression models, if those are implemented poorly, it can do a lot of harm. And so usually when people talk about defining AI, there's some kind of regulatory piece around it. So I like, for that reason, I like to keep it broad. But second, I think there's a ton amount of intelligence in the biological world that is incredibly underexplored. And as soon as we start thinking AI only goes to human type capabilities, particularly around language and reasoning and cognitive thinking, all that kind of fun stuff that tech vendors like to use, we then write off incredible, vast array of biological intelligence that is underexplored, and in many ways much more sophisticated and adaptable to the larger environment than our LLM systems. And my favorite book here, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, Ryan, that I read this year, it's called The Light Eaters. It's all about plant intelligence, controversial, they from the beginning. But each chapter, they kind of walk through different sensory systems that animals, non-human animals carry, I guess human animals as well. And they kind of show that plants have some kind of variation of that same kind of a thing. It may look different, may show up different, but functionally it's equivalent. And for me, I read that book and it just opened up my eyes again to, plants. You think of, I don't look at my palm tree here and think like, that's the most intelligent thing I've seen. But then I read this book and I'm like, wow, that thing's actually incredibly adaptable. It just is different than what I'm used to.
Just remember that you're looking at us as you say that out loud. So just
when David came in to work on recording the course and the content that we put out for CUs, he was asking me questions about the flora and things like in the environment where we were at, and I was just like, yeah, I don't know, man. We'll have to look this up, And then he's like, he told me more about that book, and I've read it since we got that out there. And what's funny is this weekend I was in Montana on the Missouri River, and there was basically like a bed of just like weeds and grass underneath us, and there was all sorts of stuff on the banks constantly. And I remember sitting there and I was just like, there is just obscene amounts of interactions and little things going on here that I just never would have paid attention to at all. And it was like literally 5 minutes of just like staring off, rowing the boat. My buddy's like, what are you doing? I was like, let me tell you about the light ears. It's like all I can think about right now.
I love it.
Yeah, it was wild. So there's like a short sample of that is like I live in Nevada, sagebrush is everywhere. And it turns out one of the samples in that book was just how sagebrush essentially are communicating with each other, but it's not just on like simple chemical things from one plant to the next, but it is also based on kinship. And so just like in humans, with, if somebody's in distress, there's a tendency that you will help them the more closely related you are to them in these sort of situations. And the same thing's going on with plants. And I was like, to me, it's like a sagebrush is a sagebrush. There's billions in Nevada. And it's like, no, that's not that way at all. And the research was being done in a place that I frequently backpack in too. So I was just like, I've walked by these things and like, didn't even realize this is going on. So yeah, it's kind of, I guess, brings me back to like, there's just like so much nuance in all of this. And intelligence for me was, I don't know if I care to go to the depths of like these existential questions of like what counts and not all the time. I just kind of arbitrarily cut it off as like, these are constructs, people are going to use them different ways. And I just try to understand the moment, like how people are using it, knowing that there's a world of many different types that people use. But I think it's really interesting that essentially my understanding of this so far is that intelligence and AI tools are really just coming down to AI as math or mathematical interpretation of things that data scientists and others are doing. And while I don't understand or like care to pick up a book to go back through and catch up to all that, I let David know that early on in this project. The people that are doing that, my hat's off to them, but there's still just so much that you can learn about how these things basically interact. I think one key thing here is like AI intelligence tools right now, like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini. It's generative. It's predictive in nature. Like it's built to generate something novel for you. So if you're inputting the same prompt dozens of times, you're going to get dozens of different answers. And that should be something that should make anybody that's like writing plans off of these or using these in some sort of basic way to be like, oh, wait, they're not built for like, and I guess in my perspective, hard T capital truth. If you ask like, what did Skinner say? This was something that was going on recently on one of our old email listservs, is people were saying like, I was asking the questions essentially about Skinner and it was wrong. And it's like, well, yeah, because they're not made to be perfect like that. They're made to give you a generative output that sounds like it.
Unfortunately,
Yeah,
none of my plants are adaptable enough to handle my lack of watering and care for them. But that's a really good illusion, though. I like that. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say the reason I ask is it's probably been close to a decade now, but I remember ABAI going to a AI talk before we knew what any of this really was, or any of it was really out there. And one of the presenters talked about basically, and I apologize, I don't remember who it was, but that if we wanted the machines not to take over and do the whole matrix thing, then we should make sure we design it based on reinforcement rather than punishment, because so much of our world is based in punishment. And yeah.
This is TV Joe Lang. I'm almost positive.
Was it?
I'm
okay.
Positive. Yeah. That's something that he talks about. Yeah.
The best
I would have thought I
name
would
in
have
behavior
remembered if it
analysis
was.
too. Love it.
Yeah.
And so that got me thinking in terms of, okay, if it is the Turing test, if you really are putting it out there and trying to see, can someone differentiate the difference, we should be building it based on, schedules of reinforcement, magnitude of reinforcement, history of punishment, MOs, SDs, response effort, all these different things that, one versus the other would affect behavior, but taken as a group, you couldn't necessarily differentiate between them and determine what is affecting behavior in the current environment at that moment, unless you're altering it. And so if we, built a mathematical model that would suggest, okay, here's how these all interact with one another, and then use that as the generative learning, it would seem more human-like. But I do agree with what you're saying. That's very human-centric. Like, are humans and even biological animals what we want to create here? And all Turing really said is equivalent to human, not necessarily to mimic or confuse people to seem human. And so I do think intelligence is much different. And that's just kind of the rabbit hole I went on down all these years until thinking about it more recently. Like, is that even what we want? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's a great call out. And I think this is also where, so I fell into AI and kind of what I still see when I get really excited about the future of AI. Because there was a debate. Oh, I think it was, I won't say the name because I probably got it wrong. One of the guys that helped build the modern architecture for neural networks, was supposedly debating with a biologist at a conference in like the 2010s or something like that. So like in the old era, but right before everyone knew AI. And the biologist was kind of complaining to this neural network guy. He's like, you're trying to build these airplanes, but I want to know how birds fly. And the neural network guy wrote back, or kind of punched back, and he goes, but I don't care how birds fly. I want to build the most efficient airplane I can. And so kind of it's just like cross purposes. And so kind of to your point, some people are building AI systems because they want an incredibly efficient plane that can do a thing. Some individuals, and I'd count myself in this category, we're really interested in how can we use AI to understand biology and behavior better in ways we couldn't have without it. So different functions, and neither is right or wrong. But based on that, you're right, you're going to see different use cases being built in different ways. And I think that spins back to products in the ABA space as well. Because you can say, are some people trying to build incredibly efficient airplanes to churn out treatment reports? That's a very different architecture and approach to is somebody trying to build an incredibly adaptive system that can understand human behavior. That also generates treatment reports on the back end. Just kind of different functions and scopes and what we're after.
That's a good kind of line in the sand. I like the way you put that.
Oh, thank
Yeah, I can definitely
Most
see that.
everything's in that first category, right? Is people are just trying to essentially solve business choke
Operational
points or
Yeah.
operational situations, which is cool. But and like that's where the content is educating people largely that we're producing out there. But yeah, I think I fall more in. I try to dabble in both camps, I guess. There.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Keep up with
my
us.
largest area of interest, even though all my work's in, aberrant behavior, is theoretical and conceptual basis of human behavior. And so I want to make these models that can then lead to either prediction or further the science at the base science. And I wasn't even thinking about it in terms of the practicality in everyday life at this point. So that would
Sure.
explain why I'm necessarily looking at it from a different perspective as well.
Yeah, you might there's a batch of research going on around artificial organisms. So it kind of fall in the camp of artificial life, but they're kind of trying to do what you're saying there, where it's from these first principles, can I create a system that adapts and changes its behavior in time that then mimics the behavior that we see in biological systems? And there's, to my knowledge, at least 3 different approaches that people have taken that are doing that thing. One is evolutionary theory of behavioral dynamics, Jack McDowell. It's what's referred to as a genetic algorithm. I have a population of behaviors. In the time step, right, one is emitted. If it contacts reinforcement, it then sticks around, it reproduces, right? It has sex, right? There's parents, there's all this fun stuff, mutation, drift, all that kind of fun stuff. But, population of behaviors that then shifts over time based on reinforcement contingencies. Another is this idea called Q learning. For me, when I saw it, it is essentially the assumptions of behavioral economics just put into code, right? So the basic idea is I have, let's say, all environmental states that an organism can contact, like the columns in a data frame. All the rows would be the number of different responses that could be emitted, right? So like matching loss style, right? And so I just have this grid, and in each time step, based on the environmental context I'm in, I'm then going to choose a behavior. If it contacts reinforcement or punishment, the value of that response goes up or down accordingly. And then you just unfold it over time. And, the table updates the Q table. And over time, you have this, again, just mapping of environmental state to behavior and rough value, if you will, reinforcement punishment. And then the third is we recently took Peter Colleen's mathematical principles of reinforcement, which is, again, a very theory-driven, here's what we know about human behavior of organisms, converted into equations. And then we just took that and said, well, let's make this roll out in time. Same thing, you get similar patterns of behavior. So what's kind of cool about these is like there's some people trying to play around in that domain really hard, as you can imagine, and kind of very small set of behavior, set of environmental situations. And then at least Q learning and NPR, it's at least constrained by behavioral principles. So we're kind of trying to build ground up. But then, I don't know, playing in some of the space, I think, gosh, so like over here, I have a system going where I'm video recording the life right now of an ant. It's kind of exciting. But I think of like everything this ant is doing over here and like building an artificial organism that can even do that, computationally expensive like that. I don't even know if I could pull that off. And then we talk about like humans and building that thing up. So a lot of time until that happens, I guess.
No big deal. Just the computational system of a life of an ant beside you. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is pretty dope. Yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah, I think what really got me thinking about this beyond that presentation as well is all the different almost camps in the way people are studying these different phenomena in our field into like, delayed discounting versus behavioral economics. And then you have, Dick Malott come out and say, the delay isn't crucial. It's about the sizable and probability of the reinforcer. But if you take any of those and isolate them, they're affecting behavior. It's just as a whole, can we take all of those different variables and then determine how they interact together? And so I've been doing that for fun on the side for the last decade or so. And I've had some mathematicians try to help me, and we've still got stumped. But still, I think different models, same sort of thing everybody's doing, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I'd love to maybe hear what you guys have done with that too, because that's that sounds very interesting.
He mostly
not as much as I would have liked to, but I'd love to sit and talk to you about it sometime.
He mostly just has a beer and like talks about it the whole time.
Yeah, well, Kyle has to hear about it every once in a while whenever something reminds me of it. So
nice.
It is interesting. Awesome. It is interesting. I won't sell it short. we're running lower on time. I wanted to give you guys a chance to plug Project Chiron, talk about what it is you're doing, what your mission is, and how people can find that online.
Yeah. So Project Chiron, like we said, started out at just like both Dave and I shotting back and forth and realizing that there was just a lot of need for getting good educational content out there and like what's going on. So AI literacy is kind of the bucket of what we're doing. Chiron's the newsletter series, and there's also some educational courses as well. First of all, the name came from the mythological centaur who trained heroes. So Chiron, tying into that. And the idea there is that just like behavior analysts can be wise, disciplined, grounded in science, capable of guiding others through complexity and amongst all this sort of chaos. If you're following the series and whatnot. So we created essentially 6 educational courses. They're all short, anywhere from a half hour to an hour and a half. There's a foundational course, and then there is role-specific courses. So RBT, BCBA, clinical director.
Nice.
There's ABA, organizational leadership, strategic leadership, and then academic researcher categories there. And then in addition to that, since this space moves so fast, that was meant to be evergreen. So it's like, hey, here's how the basics of these work. We plucked a couple ideas from some of those, but that total content bucket's like 5.5 hours that I just mentioned there with all those different roles. So there's a lot that goes in there. But then the newsletter is specifically set up to talk about something that's expand upon maybe a little bit more that's in the course, but also build this series of things that if you read front to back is just kind of building amongst on itself, in creating essentially this little digital world of AI content that you can read about and how it impacts behavior analysis. So there's a lot of like essentially educational kind of stuff for about 5 minutes, told in kind of a story structure a little bit, and then typically ending with some questions and things that you can do throughout the week to kind of like really try to apply those sort of things as well. And we're trying to best as we can to also include just relevant links, like what's happening in this space that might impact behavior analysis in sort of capacity. We're not commenting on them, but like a good example is Illinois recently started doing some pushback on any sort of AI chatbots for therapists. And it's like those things is what we include in there because it's like, hey, this is probably going to be some downstream implications for behavior analysts as well. So yeah, that's on hosted on the Behavior Academy, which is the domain that I run and host all this stuff on. I don't know if I missed anything, David.
No, I think you nailed it. I think maybe the only other thing I'd make explicit is kind of like you mentioned for the newsletter. I should phrase that. For the video series, we had those different roles that we were after. In the newsletter, we're also trying to hit different things like technical understanding, critical evaluation of AI systems, awareness, data literacy, ethical topics, societal impact, risk assessment, practical interaction skills, things like that. So all of those across those different, personas, if you will, types of individuals that might interact with these systems. So we're trying to go about it systematically.
Yeah. A little predictable as to what you're going to get across a time period, essentially. But when you click in, you don't know exactly what that's going to be. You know, it's a little adventure.
Yeah. Well,
and we like to think it's written in an engaging way as well. It's not just textbook style writing. I think we have fun.
Yeah, no, not academic. No math. I think that's a big thing here is like, there's no math included in these. That's kind of a core theme here. AI is math, but it's not like necessary to be able to kind of engage with this sort of stuff.
Cool. Yeah, timely, and like you said, we need some direction, I think, with it. So it's cool you guys are kind of spearheading that. I did I forgot to tell you this earlier, David. I did a CEU earlier a few months ago with Megan DeLeon actually on AI, and one of her resources was just your LinkedIn page, which was I thought was amazing. If somebody just social media business outlet was just also just just go to his page. So as we wind down, AI, as any BCBA, RBT, what have you, is listening to this, what are some of the things they should do? What would you recommend they do now that they maybe haven't done in order to better acquaint themselves with, what this is? Like, where do we go from here? And what would you kind of your plea to the behavior analytic community in this realm be?
You want to go first, Ryan?
I'll go first. Mine's like just focused on one area, which is the more you contact information related to this area, and this goes true for anything, like different theoretical conceptual models you want to go into behavior analysis or whatnot, just the more understanding of the nuance you have at the end of the day of like how these things are going. And I think that creates that really exciting and like optimistic feeling, but also that very pessimistic feeling that we were talking about at the beginning. And so like one example of those is the privacy side of this is just unbelievably scary. And I don't think it becomes as scary if you learn how they work and like what information to give them and what not to give them and how to frame it. But it's just a good example. Like one of the key hires for ChatGPT or OpenAI, which creates ChatGPT, last year was someone named Paul Nakasone. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, which was the past NSA director. And so we literally have people that were in charge of like absolutely massive surveillance state situations in the government that are hired in ChatGPT, and ChatGPT recently required by law to never delete a chat. So right now, anything that is entered in ChatGPT is being held forever. Even if you delete it in your page, it's still stored on their server at the end of the day, because there's a legal holdup right now saying that we might have to query these at the end of the day. And so something as simple as like putting in someone's PHI information could be unbelievably traumatic at the end of the day, depending on where that goes. So, but like we said at the beginning here, more learning how they work and creating like these wall-off garden systems and things like this has created a lot of optimism for me. I was like, hey, these things are awesome. We can leverage them. It's just leveraging them the right way. So if you dig in, you usually find something interesting. For me, it was the privacy angle that I think kind of opens and expands this whole topic to be like, wow, this is awesome. This is scary. But like now I can like, it creates that situation where you like, I think you want to understand them a little bit better. And I hope people find that.
Love that. I just had, when you were saying that, this vision of like the US government needs some cash. So they're just going to mine through, oh, here's a PHI violation. Here's another one. Boom, just 50K, just start racking these things up. Just pull in some money.
They
Putting
took 10% stake in Intel in the last week. So, I mean, this isn't off the table.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, that's great.
So firing off that, do you think it's possible to ever truly be safe in terms of HIPAA? Because assuming generative learning, you can put out information that is client specific, but not necessarily considered PHI at the time. And they could maybe build a model and determine who it is you're talking about based on that,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I would never assume it's safe.
Having a model that's running on your own servers that are set up correctly gets around that totally. So again, that's my super scary, but it's like, oh, there's ways to do this that limit that.
I like that. I think if I were to throw anything out to everybody, my biggest concern, and so I also teach in higher ed at Endicott College in the master's PhD program there. So my biggest concern for current students is I'm going to call it like never skilling. So they're using ChatGPT to complete assignments and do things and never really learning the things we need them to learn. And that's like the future of our field. Similarly, I think there's a lot of de-skilling is the term that's more popular among people that are using ChatGPT and they're losing the skills that they had previously. I think those are my two biggest concerns. And so I think for those that are either playing around with this or you're supervising people or you're an educator is figuring out, and I don't have any great answers here, but figuring out how do we take a one-day break from AI once a week, right? Or how do you set up scenarios so even though the easy button is here, I'm going to take the hard routes at some percentage of the time to maintain skills or to make sure I'm actually learning the things that I need to learn. Because it could be, I don't know, the movie Idiocracy always comes to mind, right? We're putting Gatorade on our crops in 20 years or something.
It's got what plants crave.
Yeah, that would probably be my biggest concern, just because it's taking all information and the amount of bullshit that's getting put online day in and day out. If you're using that because you can't find adequate supervision to try to learn, and you're just learning the wrong things, I think that from a scientific, behavior analytics standpoint is probably what scares me the most.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And kind of to Ryan's point too, it's not as though there aren't ways to build these things right, like to create a private tutor. Like we're saying, that's fine-tuned on behavior analytic journals that create flashcards where the outputs are validated by some kind of human expert, so you know the content you're getting is great. The challenge is no one has really quite built those systems yet, so they don't quite exist, so we're not there. But possible.
And whether will people pay for that version versus just going online and trying to get it for free somehow too?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Well, this has been amazing.
Human behavior says no.
David and Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. Anything else before we sign off here? Did we touch on all the major points?
I think so. I think the only thing left that I'd say is appreciate you for having me back on again. I didn't realize I was the first repeat guest, so yeah, appreciate that, and appreciate you letting us on.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It feels more legitimate that way for sure. So
it's always fun. So next time, again, come up with another idea. We'll dive in again.
I love it.
Totally.
David,
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, David and Ryan, the creators of Project Chiron, a behavior analytic / AI training initiative. Check it out online. And guys, thanks so much again. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys.